an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, chapters 49 and 50. In these chapters, I really didn't expect that I would enjoy reading the parts where Luanzia is tortured. And, don't get me wrong, that was my least favorite part. But I'm feeling way more sort of understanding of these fucking people now than I was. By the way, chapter titles are The Dream of City Ships and Homecoming. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very, very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Kyle is in the chat. He says, "What is up? Wall of Storms has been fully commissioned. Will be done in August." Oh, damn. Thank you, Kyle. I can't believe the next book isn't coming out until January. Pardon me, everyone. I'm adjusting my mic a little bit. But in the meantime, Kyle is going to be commissioning a little bit of a placeholder. I don't remember the name of it, but you will hear about it in August, I guess. Guys, this is a real trip. This section is... I don't want to say I get Tenryo's point, because Tenryo is a monster. But the thing is, I'm recording this a couple of days after a black man was murdered in the street by police, and people are trying to act like that shit isn't what it was. And there has been rioting. A police precinct has been burned down. Looting. And I gotta be honest, I'm fine with it. When you are treated a certain way, I can't have the same sort of energy for you coming at the people who did that shit to you. And granted, what goes on with Tenryo and his people isn't generations and centuries of oppression. So it's not quite the same thing. However, it's obviously meant to be a representation of that kind of treatment. Because what we see is the lords of Dara sweeping into a world that does not know them and is not ready for them, with an indigenous people who are behind technologically and are very vulnerable. And these assholes come in, take a bunch of stuff, infect them with diseases they have no immune system for. And granted, maybe that's not on purpose, but it's nevertheless on top of the way that they are treated as essentially slaves. There is a real colonizer vibe to this whole thing. It's really interesting to have it be reversed in terms of race, because the people of Dara are darker skinned, and the Lyucu? I can't believe I already have forgotten exactly how they say the name of their people. Lyucu. Thank you. They are white and blonde. So it's a flip on what we're used to seeing racially. But in terms of the dynamic and the power, it is a very, very familiar story. And when you add this dimension to what is going on, granted, there is, of course, I mean, like I said, Tenryo is already a bloodthirsty motherfucker by the time these people land. He isn't at all averse to killing great numbers personally and with his buddies. I'm not trying to act like this is a peaceable man who got pushed too far. But what they did is they pushed the wrong fucking one. And they thought they were dealing with somebody really docile and submissive. And they got a whole other problem. And I gotta say, your fault, guys. Like, and it's not. That's what's not, like, I know when I'm saying this, that it's not really fair. Because the man who, like, underestimated him and treated him badly and demanded women and all of this stuff, this is a dude who is personally trash. Other people tried to stand up to him. I really don't think they could have tried that hard because he's one guy and they could have done more. But he was the one in charge. And once he is taken out, Tenryo decides that he is going to basically go and like wreak vengeance and also take for his people a world that is much more fertile and easy than the one that they currently live in. And I have to admit, there's a part of me that, like, when you are somebody who has scraped and barely managed to survive for a long time, and you see other people who are ignorant and oppressive and terrible on Easy Street, allegedly, it's gotta chafe. I mean, I know it fucking does for me. And it's a very different situation in my case, and I still get so resentful. So Tenryo wanting to go and take this away from this, like, group of people, even though those people as a whole are innocent. They did not personally have anything to do with the way he has been treated. They represent a culture from which a man like this and his friends are possible. And so there is an assumption that he has that the whole culture must be trash if these are the kinds of men that it churns out. And while we may know of the good people in Dara, I can't deny that there are major parts of Dara culture that are indeed trash. It's just that so many of those parts of their culture that are terrible are the exact thing that Tenryo does, because he's just like, somebody doesn't agree with him, somebody starts saying some shit about the way he runs things, he's just executing them. The torture that they inflict on Lewin goes on for days. So these are not nicer, more just people necessarily. They're certainly they have a more equal society in terms of women, so that's cool. The women are treated much more as full members of society with all of the same rights and whatnot. So that's an advantage. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure if there is, the thing about a society that has the kinds of luxuries and stability that the people of Dara have is that then fosters changes in the structure of that society, because they don't need to have all hands on deck due to the fact that they can survive without constantly grappling and fighting against imminent starvation. That's, it's one of those things. It's like, once you get past having to constantly struggle to stay alive, that's when culture begins to happen. So while it may look better for us right now that the Lyucu have a more egalitarian system, I do not necessarily have the confidence that's going to continue once they are exposed to this sort of stability. I keep saying stability, but it's deeper than that. it's just this sort of plenty and abundance. And that's obviously what I'm saying is a pure speculation. I have no idea what they will really do if they are able to take custody of Dara completely. But I have just, it's sort of like the Animal Farm situation where you trust that somebody else is going to have your back. But once they wind up being able to usurp the previous power, they sort of fall into the same exact habits and corruptions that the previous rulers did. So I'm sort of wondering if that isn't going to just happen, on a larger scale with the people. And they may begin to fall into the same traps that are what causes them to sort of look askance at the people of Dara. But anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself. So let's start off with chapter 49. And we have Oga telling the story. And we find out later that telling the story is Oga's whole goddamn job. Like, Oga is the kind of person who can capture the imagination of a crowd, who is just very gifted in the way that he tells stories. And this causes him to be seen as a potential threat because he's sort of at the center of gatherings a little bit later, which makes them wonder if he's going to head up a rebellion. But it turns out that he is just trying to keep them distracted and give them some respite from what they're going through. The stories he's telling aren't necessarily at all stories of rebellion. They are fairy tales and myths and things that have been sort of strung together between the old stories from Dara and the things that they have heard from the Lyucans. So I really like this being a feature, and it makes it sort of poignant later on when he's the one that has to speak for Luan, because Luan doesn't have his tongue anymore. And I should mention too, I don't believe that we find out what happened to Luan in terms of his tongue. We know about a lot of the torture he has endured, but he's obviously undergone more since the end of this particular segment of the story. So that could be part of why this wasn't as disturbing to read as I expected, because we haven't gotten the full thing yet. So we find out that when these ships first arrived, a lot of the Lyucan nobles are kind of they're fucking giant ships loaded with people who are obviously a threat. We should definitely attack them immediately. And Tenryo is no, guys. Do you see the size of their ships and the number of people on them? We can't come out of the gate trying to be on the offensive when we have no idea who it is we're dealing with and what kind of, for lack of a better term, firepower they have, even though that's not exactly applicable here. We need to play it really cool and behave as if we don't have any defenses to begin with, and they will not see us as a threat, but we will gather information in the meantime. And the thing is that he doesn't actually tell them that this is his plan. And that's the only thing about this that frustrated me a little bit, is that he tells them, disassemble all of the new tents and make sure the dwellings that are left up are the ones that are decrepit and worn. Hide the Garinophins and make it so that, these people don't even know that they exist. Don't let them explore too far where they're, tethered so that they don't see them. And be very, very submissive. And to a degree that they begin to get sort of insulted and they can't believe that he is so deferential. And some of them start to make noise about it. And those are the ones that he winds up taking out. I wanted him to be a little bit more open about what his plan was here, so that there wasn't this kind of like low-level rebellion fomenting. He nips it in the bud. Granted, he's able to handle it. And maybe his concern is that if he tells them too much, they won't be able to play their parts quite as well. But I would argue that if they know that they are going to get their revenge later, they are more likely to be able to play submissive in the moment than later, because they are going to be able to swallow their rage, knowing that eventually they're going to be able to give these assholes what's coming to them. Nevertheless, whether I think this was the right call or not, it does work. So they bring out all of this food and these gifts and, you know, allow the visitors space to land on the shore. And it says Peku Tenryo and his thanes gawped at these exotic new people. Look at how dark some of them are. Have they been sunburnt until their skin refuses to heal? And why are so many of them so fat? Do they not work or fight? And look at the shapes of their eyes and noses and foreheads. Who knew people could look like that? This is always interesting to me, the idea of seeing a different race when you have never seen anybody of that race before. I, you know, as a child, have been so exposed to so many different races, both in the neighborhood that I grew up in, which was very diverse, and then also television, that I just can't imagine what it's like to see somebody of a race that not only you've never seen before, but you didn't know existed in the first place. I really don't know what I would make of, like, you would have to wonder, are we both straight up human beings, or is there something else? Are there different versions of human beings? Like, and that's essentially what races are, right? But the fact that they don't speak the same language or anything, they don't have a lot of the same, like, it's just such a wild sort of perspective that there's no way for me to even put myself in their shoes to vaguely guess what it's like to experience something like this. So Peku notices that they have these fucking like amazing swords that are all made of metal. And it's not that they don't have any metal in their culture. It's just that it is very far between, and it's not something that they depend on at all. And also, one of my favorite things is the fact that the ships are made out of wood, and that the wood is so unheard of in that amount that he feels this is as much evidence as anything that these guys are nothing to be trifled with, because they have access to these kinds of materials. Also, I like the note of that everyone who was on the beach appeared to be a man. Where were the women? And of course, he would ask that question because they bring their women with them when they fucking head out to war or to explore. Keeping the men and women separate for something like this is not something they do. So it's just sort of a like, why would you? And this whole thing with the wood is so funny in particular because later on, the way this goes is that he gets tricked by this like kind of long con of cutting down trees somewhere else and then leaving them out in the water to like float to the shore. And I cannot get over that he is taken in by this just sudden miraculous appearance of all of these logs floating. So weird. It's just what we needed. Who could understand? It must be a miracle from the gods. Sweetie, are you really that fucking stupid? Apparently, yes. Apparently, he is indeed that fucking stupid. After their year-long voyage, the men of Dara who stumbled ashore were half-starved and grateful for solid land. But they couldn't relax yet. This land wasn't uninhabited. So then we get to see from the Admiral's point of view what it looks like to him. He is dealing with these new native people, and everything about the neighborhood, what's the word I want? Community, village, I guess, that he has come upon looks very unimpressive, extremely primitive. It looks very much like they're living on the edge, which is true, but they've, exaggerated that for their own benefit here. And it says, and the postures of the natives led by their empty-handed chief appeared submissive and humble. Krita could also see a feast laid out on the beach filled with food that made his mouth water. And Krita, essentially, his first reaction is to be disappointed because he realizes that these are not immortals, which is who they were originally looking for. But then he says that these are a gentle, harmless, savage people. And later on, the words used to describe them are like exotic, pets, innocent is one that's also brought up a lot. And it's a really lovely, I think it's handled really well by the author. The kind of patronizing and condescending viewpoint somebody like the Admiral has. It's super gross, but we will get there. So everybody comes ashore. The guests are given food and fresh water, yada, yada, yada. They are attempting to communicate as best they can. They obviously don't speak the same language. So they have to use like gestures and very exaggerated facial expressions. And anytime that they kind of want to go and check out the countryside and look at the land that they have arrived at, they are dissuaded, but not like, nobody says no. They just pretend they don't understand what it is they're asking for. And the guests are personally not even that interested in like looking around because they feel like this village here is not advanced. And I bet there isn't much better out there. We're seeing right now the best they have to offer or close to it. And we're not really that interested in getting back on the road to continue pursuing something when this might be as good as it gets. And there's food here and we've been starving. And so, yeah, maybe we'll just chill here. It says, it was clear that these barbarians didn't know anything about immortals. The expedition members, surrounded daily by admiring glances and expressions of amazement, began to feel as if they were the lords of all creation. Yeah, I bet they did. They became ever more arrogant toward their hosts, demanding more food, service, and the company of women, whether willing or not. When a few of Krita's men acted out their base instincts on some of the native women, Mapidere's expedition was mostly staffed by men, the insulted women, one of whom was the Lyucu chieftain, reacted with anger and brought their friends and followers to demand justice with clubs and axes drawn. Krita decided that a show of force was necessary, and instead of retreating to the city ships with the offending members of the expedition, he ordered the Marines to stand their ground and do whatever was necessary to defend the Dara camp. The result was a one-sided slaughter. The Lyucu had never fought against metal weapons or bows, and 17 Lyucu warriors lay dead at the end of the skirmish while only one of Krita's men was injured, not even killed. Still, Krita was keenly aware of how vastly outnumbered his side was, and he ordered everyone to retreat onto the city ships and prepare to set sail if the situation deteriorated further. But Tenryo came personally to apologize, kneeling on the beach and begging for Krita to return. Thinking he had impressed the barbaric chief with the display of force, Krita agreed. I hate this so much. And like, again, Tenryo is playing the long game. And a part of me is like a little bit on his side by the time we're done with this chapter. Not really, but like a little bit. And And there is this like awful inevitability to this skirmish ending up this way. They get in this confrontation because of rape. And it is just so fucking, of course they did. They show up and they just rape some Native women. Absolutely, of course they fucking did. And when these women and their friends and family decide to defend themselves, the response is, we're going to teach you a lesson for trying to defend yourself. What even is the world? Because this is exactly how the fuck it goes down. It just, every time. It's so disgusting and I hate it so much, and the world is garbage and everybody should just we should just throw ourselves all into a lake. So Krita says that these people don't pose a threat. They don't even know how to use metal. They must be terrified of us. We're like gods to these people. And he starts to do the whole like, I am the Lord of the world and you are my servants sort of thing. Krita now demanded that the Lyucu acknowledge the suzerainty of Dara. And you know what? I'm going to look up this word because I remember when I reached this, I was like, I need to find out what this means. And I didn't know. Suzerain, a sovereign or state having some control over another state that is internally autonomous. Gotcha. Okay. So it's like feudal. Yeah. With himself as the emperor's personal representative, the Pekyu readily acquiesced and treated Krita as his lord and master. The Lyucu thanes were outraged and stared at their king in disbelief, but Pekyu Tenryo's authority was such that not a single person objected. That really is some authority. Like, he's basically like rolling over and showing his belly, not telling any of them what he's actually up to. And they're just like, I cannot believe this motherfucker, but fine, I guess. Which, you have to have some absolute fucking control over people for them to be willing to set aside their pride that way, you know? And so Krita thinks that, you know, oh, I've really done it. Their wills are broken and they have definitely like submitted to us. And he even is kind of like, wow, this Pekyu Tenryo, he's really smart. He's decided to submit because he realizes that he is just no match for us. And that's like a really intelligent move on his part. But then we have like the horrible plague that sweeps through because the people from Dara are immune to it. People coughed, boils appeared on their skins, and many died. Every family mourned because every family lost someone. But the people from Dara seemed immune to the plague. Many people began to whisper this was a punishment from the All-Father and every mother for Pekyu Tenryo's craven behavior. Pekyu Tenryo executed those who spread such rumors. Eventually, people stopped dying. We have become more like them, said Tenryo, and it was not clear if he meant it as a lament or a celebration. I like that line because we have become more like them is honestly very true in a literal sense about building up antibodies, but it's meant to be sort of a symbolic thing in that moment, but it's genuinely accurate. And we have like this little intercession of Luan Zia saying to Oga, this story is not anything like what they told me when I got here. And Oga's like, oh, really? Is it not? I'm sure you'll see why in just a second. So Tenryo is following his, like, these dudes around and being very, like, what's the word I want to say? When you are extremely, when you provide a lot. I'm trying to think of the word I need. Obsequious, Kyle says. That's a good word. It wasn't the one that I meant, but yeah, that works. And all of his people are kind of looking at him like, what the fuck, dude? Seriously? Is this how you want to play this? Since just nodding and smiling all the time bored the lords of Dara, Tenryo peppered them with questions conveyed by gestures and exaggerated facial expressions. He mimed that he wanted to hear stories about how the great city ships were built, and he promised to be delighted and awed if his masters would show him how the ships actually sailed. And Krita is decided to, like, completely tell them absolutely everything. Explains how, like, the lumber that they need, the way things are, like, put together. And then we have the whole thing where he goes and, like, Tenryo dispatches some people to go and collect lumber and has it mysteriously appear on the beach that Krita doesn't, like, fucking see is a clear ploy to get them to build more ships. And this moment, this is the one I was talking about. I hate this so much. Krita had not been religious, but after, like, you know, managing to stay alive and come to this new land where he is being provided for, he sort of has a bit of a change of heart in that department. And it says, he piously thanked the gods and now viewed Peku Tenryo, who had delivered the exciting news, as some sort of exotic native good luck charm. Up to this point, Krita and his captains had taken care to keep the natives away from the city ships in order not to reveal too much information about themselves. However, good luck charms were harmless, beloved, and trusted. And Hujin Krita now brushed aside urgings of caution from his advisors and allowed the barbarians, especially the good-looking women, to come aboard the city ships to better serve their Dara masters and lovers. He began to forget where he was. So much did he enjoy the hospitality of these rather primitive but innocent savages. Yeah, so then we have this amazing segment about the women and how all of them are learning how to do, like, the local dances, how they're learning to use makeup, how they're learning to, like, give a coquettish look and flirt, act impressed over things, be very solicitous. That was the word I was looking for, solicitous, earlier, but this applies now. They are basically being Stepford wives, and these men are fucking falling for it. And it's amazing because the wives, because there's a couple of women here, there's not a ton, but I would probably guess like maybe 10 or 15. They are sort of like, are you really buying this? Because these bitches are not, this ain't how we be. They are not this stupid. Come on. And I love Admiral Krita says basically, like, well, I mean, they've been saddled with these gross, nasty men who, you know, are no representation of culture or intelligence. And now they are being confronted by a better brand of man. And what makes it seem so implausible that they wouldn't be absolutely enthralled by us? If I were one of these women, I would absolutely want to fuck me. And then my favorite, of course, when some of the women of Dara requested that Lyucu men be assigned to them, Admiral Krita denied the demands immediately as incompatible with the teachings of Konfiji and other sages. Oh, I will just bet. Good luck, buddy. These bitches gonna fuck, whether you like it or not. So, and sure enough, that is what begins happening. So Tenryo begins to learn more and more Dara. I don't know if it's called Dara. Do they say, like, he speaks Dara? Is that how that's referred to? It says in learning the vernacular of Dara, but I can't remember if that's, like, the name of the language or not. And Tenryo explains to Krita and his people that as, like, they're trying to learn the language of the Lyucu. And he says that, oh, no. we're so behind you all in terms of refinement and civilization that your superior intellect shouldn't be sullied by our very basic primitive language. We should definitely just improve ourselves to maybe one day reach a level near to yours. Of course, because he doesn't want them to be able to understand the conversations that he's having with his own people, because shit's about to go down and they can't know that. It's amazing that Admiral Krita falls for this. Like, it's not amazing. This is 100% believable. I'm not shitting on the author here. It's just, to me, the idea of buying hook, line, and sinker this kind of flattery is so absurd that the ego required boggles my mind. I just don't know how you make it in the world when you are this susceptible to flattery. Like, you must be so easy to manipulate. And how has it not happened already before he ever even gets here that somebody has taken advantage of him? Maybe they have. We don't hear his life story. So as the Lyucu helped Admiral Krita repair his ships and resupply them for an eventual journey back to Dara, Tenryo proposed that progress would be sped up if the craftsmen and engineers of Dara would take on Lyucu apprentices to perform less skilled work. And yeah, this is another batch of lumber just shows up, and they're all learning exactly how to, handle making all of this stuff. And Krita is low key, as much as this whole thing is meant to be aimed at a plan to turn around and go back to Dara. Krita's kind of having a good time. And he doesn't really know that he wants to go back. They've been on the seas a year, reminder, by the time they wind up here. And I'm sure there is a little bit of doubt as to whether they're going to even be able to make it back alive. So there's a part of me that even if it weren't for the fact that he's just got this fucking island of slaves that seem to be tending his every whim, even setting that aside, I don't really blame Krita for kind of not wanting to get back on the water again. But, God. He really wanted nothing more than this happy life where all his needs were taken care of by Peku Tenryo, and he could spend almost every hour in the company of a string of lovely exotic mistresses whose athletic bodies showed him heights of pleasure he had never imagined. Once in a while, he thought of his old friend Ronaza Metu and felt a twinge of guilt, as he suspected that Emperor Mapidere had already carried out his threat against him. But if that was so, wasn't it even more incumbent on him to enjoy this life for both of them? Kyle, remind me, because I went back and I couldn't find the spot where this is mentioned. Is that his, girlfriend that the Emperor said, I will basically kill if you don't find the immortals? Is that how that was? Because it vaguely feels this way, but I'm, not totally sure that I remember that being mentioned. Kyle says it was his business partner. Okay. And Kyle also said that he doesn't think that the language of Dara is named. Okay, cool. And I love too that the other men pretty much agree with him, because I kind of wondered if Krita was going to be alone in wanting to stay here, and these other men were going to be no, I have family or whatever. But no, they're all very much enjoying getting to be there. The way this is described, the men rather enjoyed playing the role of fonts of wisdom, regaling their companions in bed with all kinds of lectures about the history, geography, science, and politics of Dara. To the delight of many of these lords of Dara, the women seemed especially impressed with tales of the martial prowess of their homeland, and asked the men to explain in detail the brilliant field tactics of these legendary generals, and to demonstrate the proper way to use the terrible fancy weapons of Dara. Yeah, this is just... this is such a guy thing, man. It really is. And that's not to say that women can't also be tricked with flattery, because of course we can. I mean, women's appearances are so important in society that flattering and complimenting is a very quick way for a lot of us to feel a little bit warmer towards somebody. But the difference is that women are used to men having ulterior motives because we are always on guard against being taken advantage of. And men do not see women as threats the same way. So with us, while we are susceptible to it, we also have a sort of built-in suspicion that men don't really have, unless it's regarding stuff that has to do with money, in which case dudes are super suspicious of women. But in terms of this sort of thing, they don't have the cultural background to know that these women are interested because they are martial themselves. These guys don't think women know about this stuff, and they fail to recognize that these women are all fighters in their own right. And that's why they have these athletic bodies, because they are out here doing the work. So yeah, these dudes are they're just not thinking. So Krita it says he refused to permit any of the Dara women on the expedition from enjoying the company of the Lyucu men. This was a prohibition that grew increasingly hard to enforce over time. And eventually we find out that there are mixed children that are being born. But even when they have Lyucu blood, they are pretty much treated as slaves later on when things go south, the way the rest of those from Dara are. So it's sort of similar to the one drop rule. Whether or not they have Lyucu in them, it doesn't matter. They're tainted and they are treated as a slave. So the stories the Dara women told their lovers had a distinctly different flavor than the stories told by the men. For one thing, Admiral Krita and his commanding staff appeared much less heroic in these stories than in their own tellings. And this goes on and on. Peku keeps on supplying them with everything they need, coming up with reasons for them to stay and not take off quite yet, which is what they want anyway, so it feeds right into their intentions. Perhaps the Lords of Dara would like to make more metal weapons with Lyucu aid? How about teaching and training Lyuca sailors to help when the expedition fleet decides to resume its journey? Maybe the Lyuca craftsmen, some of whom are now fairly skilled under the tutelage of Dara masters, could help recreate some of the wonders the Lords of Dara have spoken of in their homeland. And it gets more and more intense, with Krita becoming more and more aggressive, tyrannical, and just turning into a slave driver in many senses of the word. And people begin to bring up objections after all. They have already been treating these people as slaves and nobody had a problem. But once he starts getting a little bit too intense with it, all of a sudden everybody wants to be like, whoa. And I'm like, guys, it's too fucking late now. You don't get to so typical. We were fine with a little slavery, but this. So one morning, Krita wakes up and his hands and feet are bound together. And the two women that he has been sleeping with the most are standing there holding a sword and a bow and looking at him in a way that they haven't really been looking at him. They've been so submissive and docile and pretty and flattering and warm, and all of a sudden they are standing in a different way and speaking in a different way. And he begins to call one of them a whore, and the other woman steps forward and slaps him across the face. And it is honestly the most fucking satisfying thing. I love it so much. Untie me immediately. When Tenryo finds out about this, he'll kill everyone in your families, you damned whore. Kia, who had never once before thwarted his will, stepped up and slapped him hard across the face, silencing him immediately. And they take him out of there and march him up to join his other buddies that are also all tied up and captured. And all of him and his dudes just begin to realize how fucking stupid they have been and what an enormous mistake they have made. By the time the sun had completely risen, almost all the city's ships had been captured. Most of the captains and senior officers had been incapacitated by their Lyucu lovers in sleep. And of the few who had awakened in time to try and put up some sort of resistance, the Lyucu women overcame them easily, as they had seen the men's fighting techniques in great detail and worked out counter moves ahead of time. Bitches be fucking thinking. Using the officers as hostages, the women had forced the sailors and marines to drop down rope ladders and welcome aboard the Lyucu warriors, who rowed out to the anchored ships. Of the 50 city ships, and I don't think I knew there were that many. Like, that's bonkers. But nevertheless, of the 50 city ships in the expedition fleet, only 2 had captains who refused to give in and commanded their crews to resist to the utmost. They were killed. But the sailors were able to overwhelm the Lyucu women and lift anchor in an attempt to escape from this sudden turn of events. They barely managed to get about a mile away before the great Garinifins rose over the horizon and fell on them. Honestly, it is so satisfying when Krita gets slapped across the face that sort of overshadowed this moment when they actually find out that these people have fucking dragons. And I forgot, but man, and that's when everybody is like, okay, we knew we had been making a mistake once we got let out here, but now we watched the way they just took down these ships like it was nothing, and now we really understand how bad we done fucked up. It's amazing. Oh my god, I love it so much. This is like fantasy. And I don't mean like the way this actually is fantasy. I mean, don't y'all wish that the native peoples of colonized lands had dragons to fight back with? Because I do. How different would the landscape of the world look if they had been in a position to really fight back? I just wish. I really do. So they're put in cellars, and Tenryo gathers all of his people together, and basically he makes this huge long speech that's essentially like, the Allfather has given us a land to conquer because our lives here are really hard, and those people that live there right now do not deserve to live there. We do, and we're going to take it. And like I said, I can't even be that mad. Like, when you just got treated this way by these people, they just swoop in, eat your food, rape your women, slaughter your people, and then demand for you to just give them more. I'm having a real hard time not seeing what his point is here. They have no concept of honor and lie constantly to make themselves appear greater and more powerful. Effete and stupid, they understand only the language of violence. They thought they could intimidate us with their metal swords and vibrating bows, and yet when our Garinifin riders appeared, all they could do was cower in fear without even putting up a real fight. Though we followed the custom of the scrublands and opened our tents and hearts to strangers, sharing all that we possessed with them, they sought only to dominate and enslave us. The Allfather could not have meant for such a barbarous race to possess paradise. He sent these savages to us as a message, telling us he has prepared a new home for us already filled with slaves. It doesn't not make sense. So, things just take a turn from here on. And Tenryo starts to be, because now he can be more overt and just examine the technologies that they have and the weapons that they have, figure out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. The things that, like metalworking and whatnot that are practical for them to look into with the supplies that they have. And he realizes that like they can't really match these people from Dara with the same type of weapons because they don't have the supply of metal and wood to build them with. So they need to figure out an alternate way to take these people down. And that is making these, fighting versions of they make the arena and they have these men fight one another so that they can study the way that they fight and torture them a lot. Torture them a whole lot to get information out of them about how things go. And Oga eventually gets sort of like adopted as a personal servant to Tenryo because he is very entranced by the way that Oga can tell a story. And he says, "You will accompany me everywhere I go and see everything I see. Like your court historians who wrote down the deeds of the lords of Dara, you will be my biographer." And the thing is that Oga at first is kind of just like mesmerized by this borderline lunatic and is like writing down a pretty favorable biography that's like, this guy is honestly sort of a badass. I'm not even mad. But then as things begin to take a turn and the torture really ramps up and it becomes clearer what this man is planning to do, Oga begins to change what he's writing and make it a lot more truthful about who Tenryo really truly is. And unsurprisingly, Tenryo is not interested. That is not what he hired Oga to do. So he winds up tossing him down here to meditate on his crimes. And Luanzia, for his part, is just like, God damn, they really fucking lied to me. They must have seen me coming. And they made this whole like fucking fake new, graveyard and created this whole story and then bided their time to get information out of me. But he still hasn't put together what it is they're after exactly. And it's not until later that he begins to realize, as Oga continues telling the story of how many times they tried to get through the wall of storms and failed, he starts to realize, oh shit, that's what they're after. They're trying to find out a way through. Because Luan, because he was just on that raft and just watching the wall, he is able to get a pretty damn good idea. Meanwhile, these other city ships, they were sailing, and so they probably moved much faster away from the wall and didn't actually get much chance to document like the pattern that they were seeing and the way it all worked. And even when people first tell Pekyu Tenryo about the Wall of Storms, he doesn't believe the story of them initially at all. And then eventually, like, terrified survivors wind up coming back and he begins to realize that they were telling the truth about the thing, but he isn't prepared to believe that that is a barrier that you can't get through. He's like, these fucking 50 of these giant ships managed to come through. There has to be a way. It's impossible that it's impossible. We are looking at them right in front of us. So it says, that was the clue that solved the mystery of the current for me. It's a circle. The great oceanic current moves in a circle. That was Pekyu Tenryo's conclusion as well, said Oga. The current that has carried us here is like a serpent that has swallowed its tail. Had Admiral Krita continued to follow the current even as it slowed down near the coast of Ukyu, we would have been carried back to the islands of Dara. And I find that to be sort of like infuriating, that if they had just stayed on it, they would have been okay. Like, coulda, woulda, shoulda, man. That sucks. And Oga says the wreckage of the Second Fleet is what made him think that there had to be some Northwest Passage. And he said he sent out a third fleet to ascertain the route, this time with strict orders not to take unnecessary risks. The expedition returned in a year with reports that the current did indeed bring them north of Dara, where the coracles had to struggle mightily to depart from its pull. So I am running out of time here, and I'm still in chapter 49. Fuck, there's so much to talk about, though. Okay, so, I mean, there's not a whole lot that I need to say about Lu and Zia being tortured, because they, like, close the door on them while they're talking. Your attempt to commit treason has been uncovered. And then they begin to question him. And at first, they're just torturing him, and he's, like, not caving in. He's screaming plenty. They pull out all of his toenails. They break both of his legs. And it's just, as much as it's genuine pain, he isn't caving at all. But then they bring Oga in. And they decide that this dude is just... They use the idea of philosophy against Lu and Zia by essentially being like, we're going to torture this guy in front of you. And you can stop it if you tell us what you need to tell us. But if you don't, every bit of torture he endures is your fault. Because you have the ability to stop it at any moment and you're not doing it. So that's on you. And Lu and Zia is like, I think in his gut aware that's total bullshit, but he can't help but respond to that because Oga is his friend now. And it says, age had worn down his logic and he could not bear to be the instrument of torture for his friend. Sentiment makes us fools. And yet without sentiment, we would be little better than dumb instruments wielded by the gods in their incomprehensible games. So Lu and Zia begins to be more obedient and seem to, be playing along a lot more. And Oga kind of is like, dude, why won't you just kill yourself? Because you are being forced to, like, assist them in taking down your country that you come from. And Luan says, even if I were dead, they would still be able to get to Dara. I'm an old and weak man, and I'd like to see my homeland one more time before I die. But we find out that's not the only reason. So they get on the ships, they head out, they reach the Wall of Storms. Pekyu is looking at the wall and is like, well, I guess we're going to see if you're right or if you lied to me. And there's a really interesting thing when Lu and Zia first gives up the information when they're torturing Oga and he caves and gives them what they want. I really like that he has like some calculations and Pekyu takes them away and then demands that Lu and Zia recreate the same results. Pekyu is really fucking smart, man. I don't like it. Because basically his assertion is if he's just lying and inventing calculations, he isn't going to be able to come up with the exact same answers again. He will just have pulled some shit out of his ass and good luck. But if he really put in the work and time and figured this out the way that he says, he will have the same answers. So he does that a couple times just to double check that like he isn't lying. And then when they come up here, there is that parting of the wall. And Pekyu Tenryo is kind of like a little bit impressed by Lu and Zia in this moment. I actually really like this, that he's sort of like, there's a bit of him, I think he says something about how your name will live on in history as the first man to understand the secret of this marvel of nature. And Lu and Zia, it's like, that's a compliment, but also that the people that write this history are likely going to be the Lyucu, I'm sure dampens that a little bit. So finally we see Peku Tenryo passes out because Luanzia has drugged him, evidently. And he grabs the keys, and Luanzia did not know what was kept in this room. A strong scent of smoke and fire almost overwhelmed him. And that's because he doesn't know. He doesn't know yet. He does the thing. He acts compliant. That's how he got that's how he got his trust. And he goes inside. Let's see. He goes in. He lights a fire. Really, bless him. And Olga Kidosu steps out and is like, "Bitch, you're about to do this without me? Are you serious? Come on." And Luan is like, "Man, I was trying to keep you alive. They're going back to Dara. You could see your kid again." And Olga says, "I have a responsibility to fight this war so that they don't have to do it." And the Lyucu guards come at them and they start fighting. And that's the end of the chapter. It's really good, guys. It's a really good book. I like it. We know it's like fruitless and it's so sad, but it's really good. All right. I have to wrap. Thank you, Kyle, very much for commissioning this. Deeply appreciate it. I hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage. I'm angry at you, Ken Liu, for making me feel things. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.